I'm Bo Johnson, author of The End of Justice, The Rebutted Presumption, Splintered to Federal Folly, and Restoring the American Republic. I'm not here to give you another opinion. I'm here to present the one and only proposal that can save the United States of America and restore the liberty we once cherished and still deserve. But before I lay that out, I'd like to show you something most Americans have never been told, and that is the truth about federal jurisdiction and the true nature of the federal income tax. When you see it clearly, you'll feel something stir within your soul, not fear, but hope, because there is a way out, a lawful, peaceful, and undeniable solution. Let's begin. What is the federal income tax, really? Not what you were told, not what you assume, but what the law actually says. Because when you learn the truth, it changes everything. And that truth was declared clearly in the Supreme Court case known as Bruce Shaber versus Union Pacific Railroad. The court made it plain. The income tax is not a direct tax on your property or your labor. It is an excise tax, a tax on the exercise of a federal privilege. Let that sink in. It's not a tax on you. It's a tax on what you do if what you do involves a federal activity. What is a federally privileged activity? Working as a federal officer or employee, receiving federal funds, subsidies, or benefits, operating a trade or business within a federal jurisdiction, exercising a right that has been converted into a federal privilege. But working a private job in your state, running a local business, exchanging your labor for lawful compensation, that's not a federal activity. That's a right, and rights are not taxable, because to tax a right is to destroy it. So why are you paying a federal income tax? Because you were never told the truth. You were led to believe that all income is taxable. But that's not law. That's fraud by assumption. That's coercion by omission. The law is clear. You are only subject to the tax if you voluntarily engage in a federally taxable activity. No activity, no tax. You are not taxed just for being alive. You are not liable just because you work. You are only taxed when you consent. Read the law. Understand the definitions. Question the jurisdiction. Because until you do, you are not a free man or woman. You are a federal asset. This is the second shot heard around the world, a shot of truth fired in peace, but aimed at tyranny. The war isn't with muskets, it's with awareness. And now you've heard it. What you do next is what determines whether you stay free. Most Americans assume the Internal Revenue Code, Title 26 of the United States Code, is binding law for everyone. But this assumption is wrong. The United States Code is divided into titles, and not all of them have been enacted as positive law. Title 26, which contains the Internal Revenue Code, is one of those titles that has never been enacted as positive law. Instead, it is considered prima facie evidence of the statute it references. In other words, it's just a convenient compilation, not the law itself. Now, Congress knows the difference. When a title is enacted into positive law, the language of that title itself is considered the controlling law. When it is not, one must go back to the statutes at large, the actual acts of Congress for legal authority. Title 26 does not stand on its own. It is a reference, not a source of obligation for every American. This is critical. A statute that is not positive law cannot by itself create jurisdiction over someone who has not voluntarily entered a taxable activity or federal nexus. That's why the government relies on presumptions and consent, not direct statutory authority. They do this to claim that you owe an income tax. The courts have recognized that non-positive law titles do not alter or expand the law. They simply restate it for convenience. Since Title 26 is not positive law, then it cannot by itself compel a free man or woman to pay a tax unless they have willingly stepped into the federal domain. When you understand this, the narrative of universal tax liability collapses. Without positive law and without consent, there is no lawful obligation. Title 26 of the United States Code, the Internal Revenue Code, has not been enacted into positive law. That matters because a non-positive law is only prima facie evidence of the law. It is not the law itself. When there is any conflict, the statutes at large control. Let me translate this. If the government wants to bind me, it must point to the actual enacted statute, not a convenient editorial compilation of that law. Positive law titles have been passed by Congress as positive law. Title 26 has not. Therefore, it cannot expand jurisdiction or create obligations, impose liabilities that do not already and clearly exist in the statutes at large. Why? Because evidence is not authority. Compilation is not consent. Editing is not enactment. Liability for a tax or any law must be expressly stated. Taxation is never presumed. Jurisdiction is never presumed. The government bears the burden to show, one, the specific statute at large that imposes a duty on me. Two, the implementing regulation that actually reaches my status or my activity. And three, the jurisdictional nexus, the federal hook that lawfully places me inside their taxing power. If Title 26 were positive law, Congress would have said so. They did not. And that's not a typo. It's a structural choice with legal consequences. Non-positive law titles can summarize, restate, and reorganize. They cannot silently convert privilege-based excises into universal, territorial, everyone, everywhere obligations. They cannot override constitutional limits. They cannot cure a missing jurisdictional fact. They cannot transform a free American into a federally taxable person without consent, contract, office, or federally privileged activity. So here is the standard. Show me the statute at large that says that I am liable. Show me the implementing regulation that actually applies to me. Show me the jurisdictional nexus, the federal capacity, the federal territory, the federal office, or the federal benefit that lawfully attaches to me. If you can't, you don't have jurisdiction, period. This is not wordplay. It's hierarchy. You see, Congress enacts. The statutes at large control. Positive law codifications can bind. Non-positive law compilations cannot create what Congress never enacted. Therefore, absent a clear statute at large, a matching regulation, and a demonstrated federal nexus, there is no lawful imposition of an income tax on a free American living privately within a sovereign state outside federal office, benefit, or territory. Title 26 is not positive law. Prima facie text is not proof. Consent is not presumed. Jurisdiction must be shown. That's the law, and that's the end of it. Jurisdiction is everything. Without it, government power is void, no matter how many agents, badges, or courtrooms are involved. Before there can be any tax, any penalty, any enforcement, jurisdiction must be proven. Not assumed, not presumed, proven. The federal government is one of limited delegated powers. It has no general authority over the American people living in the sovereign several states. It only has what the Constitution grants it and nothing more. When it comes to taxation, the Supreme Court has been crystal clear. The federal income tax is an excise, a tax on privilege, and excise taxes only reach those engaged in federally connected activities, holding a federal office, receiving a federal benefit, working in a federal enclave, operating under federal license, or acting as an agent of the federal government. That's it. If you're living privately, earning private income, working for a private employer in a sovereign state, you are not automatically within federal jurisdiction. To apply the Internal Revenue Code to you, the government must prove three things. One, that you engaged in a taxable activity subject to an excise. Two, that Congress has lawfully extended jurisdiction over that activity. Three, that you are within the geographic and legal scope of that jurisdiction. They must cite the statute. They must cite the regulation. They must cite the jurisdictional hook. If they can't, they have no lawful claim. You can't just declare someone liable. You must show how they came under the law's reach. That's jurisdiction. That's fundamental. That's due process. And here's the kicker. You can't waive jurisdiction by silence, but they can't gain it without proof. There must be a nexus. There must be consent. There must be lawfully conferred power. Without that, everything collapses, because jurisdiction is the foundation of authority. And if that foundation doesn't exist, the whole tax scheme in that case is unlawful. So demand the proof, require the nexus, never concede what they haven't earned. Jurisdiction must be proven or else it does not exist. Here is the truth they won't tell you. The federal income tax depends on your consent. Without that consent, without your voluntary participation, the system has no lawful claim over you. The Constitution gave Congress limited power to tax. Direct taxes must be apportioned. Excise taxes must be uniform and tied to a privilege. So how do they sidestep those limits? By getting you to agree without your knowing consent. They offered you benefits, Social Security, Medicare, federal employment, taxpayer status. You accepted without knowing what you were signing. That's how they create the nexus, through contracts, applications, elections, and filings. When you fill out a W-4 form, you're telling them you're a withholding agent. When you file a 1040, you declare yourself a U.S. taxpayer under penalty of perjury. When you accept a federal benefit, you step onto their playing field. They don't force you, they invite you. Once you step in, they presume jurisdiction. But here's the catch. Consent can be withdrawn. Jurisdictional nexus can be rebutted. You can rescind those agreements, revoke those elections, and correct the record. If you're not in a federal office, not receiving federal benefits, not acting under federal privilege, and not domiciled on federal land, you are outside their taxing authority. They need your agreement to reach you. No agreement, no jurisdiction, no nexus, no liability. This isn't theory, it's contract law, it's agency law, it's the foundation of due process.